The softwood lumber industry is taking a hit because of significant new duties from the United States.
35% on lumber going across the line is just ridiculous. It's going to kill thousands of jobs.
You're building a house. You've picked out the paint colors, measured for the furniture. Everything's ready to go. Then suddenly, you realize there's no wood. Not because you forgot to buy it, but because your neighbor across the border, once a trusted partner, has shut the gate and started selling to someone else. Sounds odd, right? But that's exactly what's happening after the US government pushed tariffs on Canadian lumber to over 35%. And Canada, they didn't protest loudly. They simply shifted gears, started selling to Japan, South Korea, and Europe, leaving folks in Detroit, Texas, and Ohio scrambling as home prices soared by tens of thousands of dollars. Since July 2025, the U.S. Department of Commerce officially raised anti-dumping and subsidy duties on softwood lumber from Canada to 20.56%. When you add the older duties still in place, the total tariff on imported lumber has now hit 35%. This move is seen as an effort to protect U.S. lumber producers, but it sent a shockwave through the housing market. Over 30% of construction lumber used in the U.S., around 28 million cubic meters annually, comes from Canada. So this decision caused prices to skyrocket almost immediately. Within just 1 week of the announcement, lumber futures on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange jumped 12%, hitting their highest point since 2022. According to the Wall Street Journal, the National Association of Homebuilders (NAHB) warned each single-family home could now cost an extra $7,500 to $10,000 to build just from the rise in lumber prices. That's not only putting home ownership even further out of reach for many middle-class families, but also making it harder to afford repairs, room additions, or home improvements, especially for lower-income households. If you're thinking about building a garage, fixing your porch, or even just putting up a new wooden shelf in the kitchen, chances are it will cost you a few $100s more than it did just 2 months ago. A sheet of plywood that used to cost $28 at Home Depot is now up to $34. And with higher shipping costs caused by lumber shortages, the price hike doesn't stop there. Rather than strike back with threats or retaliation, Canada took a quieter approach, tightening the supply lines. The government of British Columbia, which produces nearly 60% of Canada's exported lumber, confirmed it's reviewing plans to apply a quota on lumber going to the U.S. starting in late Q3 of 2025. The goal is to shield Canada's own construction industry from the ripple effects of trade tensions with the U.S. According to Reuters, if this quota resembles the restrictions seen during the 2018 to 2019 disputes, lumber exports to the U.S. could drop by 25% to 30%. That could create serious shortages in border states like Washington, Michigan, and Minnesota, regions heavily dependent on Canadian wood. An analyst from RBC Capital Markets warned, if Canada really goes ahead with quota cuts, the average cost of building a new home in the U.S. could rise by another $10,000 by 2027, mainly due to a lack of materials, construction delays, and the need to turn to pricier suppliers from Latin America or Europe. Instead of clinging to the increasingly unpredictable U.S. market, Canada is shifting its lumber exports toward countries with free trade deals like Japan, Australia, and the European Union. Thanks to agreements like CPTPP and CETA, Canadian lumber enters these markets with little or no tariffs, while U.S. duties keep climbing. Natural Resources Canada reports that as of early 2025, Canadian lumber exports to Asia have grown by 14%, especially in high-value products like plywood, interior panels, and modular housing kits. These offer better profit margins than raw 204 planks. In Europe, major importers like Germany, France, and the Netherlands are stepping up their purchases from Canada to make up for reduced supply from the US and Sweden. In Q2 of 2025 alone, softwood exports from the EU to the US dropped 19% in volume, about 3.79 million cubic meters, and 13% in value. down to around 972 million euros. Today, lumber for building and furniture is more expensive and harder to find. A pressed wood door that cost $270 at the start of the year has now climbed past $330 at Home Depot, mostly due to higher import costs and fewer replacement options.
With tariff talks top of mind, South Florida farmers say they're in trouble. Crops are rotting on the vine, and they're blaming the ongoing trade wars and immigration changes.
It all started with a tax order, just one government decision. And suddenly, the U.S. finds itself short on tomatoes and losing more than just produce. If your pizza seems more expensive lately, you're not imagining it. While Washington tightened the door on Mexico, Ottawa quietly opened theirs, and Canadian farmers are the ones cashing in. But behind the headlines and the multi-billion-dollar numbers are things that hit closer to home. Pricier ketchup, restaurant menus being trimmed, and everyday Americans footing the bill for a political move. What's really going on? Here's the picture. Starting July 14th, 2025, the U.S. Department of Commerce officially pulled out of its tomato trade suspension agreement with Mexico, imposing a 17% tariff on all fresh tomatoes coming in from our southern neighbor. The reason? To prevent underpricing and to support struggling farmers in Florida and Arizona. But there's a catch. Mexico supplies about 70% to 93% of the fresh tomatoes consumed in the U.S. So, this policy shift hit like a shockwave. If you usually buy a box of tomatoes for around $3, expect to see that jump to $3.30 or more within a few weeks. And it doesn't stop there. Pizza sauce, ketchup, salsa, these staples could all see price bumps. That burger or pizza slice you enjoy might soon cost an extra 50 cents to $1. 2. Canada moves in on the opportunity. While the U.S. was closing the gate, Canada was busy rolling out the welcome mat. In July 2025, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum met with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney to announce a major expansion of their agricultural trade relationship. Mexico's cold chain logistics sector, critical for keeping produce fresh, hit $4 billion in value in 2024 and is expected to reach $6 billion by 2029. That's a solid base for tomato exports to grow fast. In the first half of 2025 alone, Canada pulled in $2.8 billion in tomato revenue, largely from rerouted Mexican supply. And with fewer trade hurdles, Canadian shoppers are getting top-quality Mexican tomatoes for around $2.50 a box, roughly 20 to 25% cheaper than what U.S. shoppers are paying at the same time. Pulling out of the Mexico agreement has led to real supply gaps in the U.S. Tomato prices are expected to rise another 6% to 10% by August 2025. Restaurants and food chains, Wendy's, Taco Bell, even household names like Heinz and DiGiorno are all rethinking their game plans. A 30 cc bottle of Heinz ketchup that used to cost $4.29 is now listed at $4.79 in major chains like Target and Walmart. Smaller restaurants are either raising prices or cutting back on tomatoes in their recipes. That means American diners are now directly feeling the impact of a trade policy that may have sounded distant, but now hits right on the dinner plate. Canada is making bold economic moves as U.S. trade policies trigger a wave of responses. Could these changes quietly reshape what Americans buy and how much they pay? In 2024, the Trump administration imposed a 50% tariff on imported aluminum to protect U.S. metal industries. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, prices of aluminum products rose 22% within months. This hit American manufacturers and construction firms hard, especially those reliant on imports. Canada, which supplies over 70% of North America's aluminum, responded strongly. Aluminary Alouette in Quebec announced a $1.1 billion plant modernization, powered by low-cost clean energy from hydro, Quebec. Quebec's economy minister stated, "The U.S. depends on U.S. for aluminum, and we won't stand by." For Americans, the effects are immediate. The price surge affects home renovation, auto repair, and beverage packaging. Costs on products like soda cans and appliances may rise, adding up to $2.5 billion annually for U.S. consumers. small businesses in construction and manufacturing face tighter margins and difficult decisions. Canada is rapidly diversifying trade. In early 2024, non-U.S. exports rose 18%, while U.S. bound exports fell to their lowest since the pandemic. Gold exports to the UK jumped over 30%. Crude oil to Singapore hit records, and Italian imports of Canadian aluminum and pharmaceuticals reached all-time highs. Pork exports to Japan rose 13%, with Canadian food favored for its clean, traceable image. As Canada looks beyond the U.S., American buyers risk losing access to key supplies, from metals to pharma ingredients, weakening supply chains, raising costs, and reducing product availability. U.S. consumers may face higher prices or longer wait times for top quality goods. Canada's Industry Minister Melanie Joly criticized the Trump administration's trade tactics, saying, "We are in a tariff war, and negotiating with the U.S. is tougher than ever." She announced a 3-point response: stronger anti-dumping rules, better liquidity support for industry, and faster project approvals, cut from 5 years to 2. Joly also introduced incentives to attract top researchers, noting, "Canada welcomes talent, especially as academic freedom faces challenges in the U.S. Canada's assertive approach may heighten competition for talent and investment. U.S. universities and tech industries risk a brain drain as researchers and students OPT for Canada's more supportive environment. This could affect American innovation and growth in tech, biotech, and energy. Canada is investing heavily in green energy, hydro, hydrogen, and advanced fuels to lead the global energy shift. High-value exports like battery tech, advanced materials, and aerospace are priorities. The goal? Commercial independence and freedom from Washington's changing moods. If Canada becomes a clean tech and export leader, U.S. industries could lose a key supplier and tech partner. That could mean tougher competition, reduced influence in North America, and, for consumers, fewer options, and higher costs for next-gen products like EVs and energy-efficient appliances.
As we just heard, the U.S. president railed against Canadian dairy and lumber industries, claiming the U.S. is being, quote, ripped off.
Once a symbol of American agriculture, the dairy industry now falters right at home, rather than being shipped off to Europe, Asia, or premium supermarkets. American milk is being dumped near unused farms. Meanwhile, Canada speaks softly but acts decisively and is quietly capturing global market share. Since mid-2025, Canada slapped import duties as high as 300% on U.S. milk that exceeds a small quota under its supply management system designed to protect domestic producers. As a result, over 90% of American milk exported to Canada has been halted. Trucks of U.S. milk have turned back, leaving millions of liters stuck in cold storage in states like Wisconsin, Vermont, and Idaho. Despite falling prices down over 30% in July, demand vanished as consumers grew wary or dismissed it as returned surplus. If you've seen 1-gallon cartons of whole milk drop from $4.20 to $2.90 at stores like Walmart or Kroger, that's not good news. It's a sign that the market is in crisis. With exports to Canada blocked, U.S. dairy entered a downward spiral. Production continued, but buyers disappeared. According to USDA, nearly 1,700 smaller dairy farms risked closure in Q2 2025. America once held 18% of the global dairy market, but by mid-2025, that plunged to under 9%, a 2-decade low. This crisis goes beyond farmers. Rural communities that rely on dairy are feeling the pinch. Schools cutting lunches, local stores left empty, banks tightening credit, and jobs vanishing. If you once lived in a small town anchored by a dairy plant, now you may see that plant shuttered, hiring signs removed, and an entire community in limbo. It's not just Canada. Key global partners are turning away U.S. dairy. The European Union added U.S. milk to a retaliatory tariff list, covering $72 billion in exports. Japan and Australia tightened import standards starting June 2025. The issue isn't quality, it's labeling transparency. Many countries require clear disclosure of growth hormone, RBST, antibiotic use, or farm source labels not mandatory in the US. Trucks of milk and cheese are being returned. Much of this excess supply is sold domestically at deep discounts, 1 gallon for as low as $1.80 instead of $3.50. But the real cost is trust. Americans are asking, if others won't buy this milk, what's in it? Confidence in the U.S. dairy industry is eroding. While the U.S. grapples with oversupply and trade retaliation, Canada quietly expands its global dairy footprint through solid planning, supply control, and farm support. Its supply management system limits oversupply, bans growth hormones and excess antibiotics, and ensures full traceability from farm to table. Exported Canadian dairy clearly states these standards, which many importing countries now expect. As a result, Canada has gained market share in Japan, South Korea, the EU, and even the Middle East. Canadian dairy export revenues surpassed 4.2 billion Canadian dollars in the first half of 2025, up nearly 18% from the same period in 2024. While U.S. families shop for those discounted cheese packs or milk jugs, they may not realize local dairy farmers are shutting operations, halting milking, or selling off farms. If this continues, the U.S. dairy sector faces more than lost markets. It risks losing the next generation of farmers once raised on its own family milk.